You think samurai were all about meditating under cherry blossoms, perfecting their sword swings and being stoic all day? Think again. While you're binging TikTok tutorials or swiping on dating apps, these warriors were living a double life so scandalous it would make reality TV look like a library reading hour. Edo Japan's samurai didn't just fight wars, they fought boredom with every taboo pleasure you can imagine. Picture this: adolescent apprentices learning secret lessons from older samurai, lessons that involved intimacy, trust, and a lot more than meditation exercises. In a culture obsessed with honor and loyalty, male lovers weren't hidden, they were studied, celebrated, and woven into the social fabric of the warrior world. It's like Hogwarts if the house points were measured in charm and stamina. And let's talk art. Shunga, the erotic prints that Japanese warriors collected in secret, were basically the samurai equivalent of Netflix binges, but with swords, scrolls, and zero parental guidance. These weren't cheap thrill doodles, they were instruction manuals, status symbols, and obsession all rolled into one. A samurai showing his shunga collection to a comrade, that was more important than showing off your katana. Now imagine the hidden brothels of Edo. These weren't chaotic dens of debauchery, they were meticulously organized underground worlds where rank mattered, etiquette was strict, and the rules of pleasure were taken as seriously as the code of the sword. Samurai could indulge in all the pleasures they wanted without tarnishing their public reputation. Think VIP clubs, if the dress code included kimono and subtle nods to your sensei. Before we continue to our story, make sure you've subscribed to our channel for our upcoming secret revealing stories like this. And don't forget to like the video cause you've never learned history in this way in your school. And please comment below where you're listening from. I'm eager to know that. Okay, let's continue to our story. When you think of samurai, you probably imagine ink paintings of mountains, cherry blossoms drifting in the wind, or maybe some minimalist calligraphy about impermanence. But what if I told you the same culture that gave us delicate haikus also produced some of the most outrageous porn in human history? Welcome to shunga, the erotic art that samurai collected, traded, and sometimes even studied like textbooks. Shunga, literally spring pictures, were woodblock prints depicting sex in every possible form. And when I say every form, I mean every form. Men with women, men with men, women with women, group scenes, threesomes, foursomes, orgies, you name it, there's probably a shunga for it. The bodies are exaggerated, the expressions are cartoonishly intense, and the genitals, let's just say Edo period artists didn't believe in subtlety. These weren't tasteful nudes. They were full-color, high-definition fantasies that would get flagged instantly if you tried to post them online today. But here's the part that blows modern minds. Shunga wasn't taboo, it was everywhere. Samurai owned them, merchants owned them, even housewives collected them. They were sold openly in the same markets as poetry books and gardening manuals. It's like going to Barnes and Noble and finding a section called erotic woodcuts between cookbooks and travel guides. For samurai, shunga had a dual purpose. Sure, it was entertainment, but it was also considered educational. Young warriors were sometimes gifted shunga albums as part of their coming of age, with the idea that these prints would teach them about sex. Imagine getting handed a porn manga at your graduation ceremony, except it was painted by one of the greatest artists of the era. And speaking of artists, we're not talking about obscure names here. Legendary figures like Hokusai, the guy who painted the Great Wave off Kanagawa, also dabbled in hardcore erotica. His most infamous shunga, a woman having sex with two octopuses. Yes, you heard that right. Tentacle porn isn't some modern internet invention. It's a 200 years old Japanese tradition that started with a samurai-era art master. What makes shunga even crazier is how widespread and normalized it was despite repeated bans. The shogunate technically outlawed shunga multiple times, calling it immoral and corrupting. But the bans never stuck. Why? Because everyone loved it too much. Samurai lords, priests, and government officials were often the biggest collectors. The hypocrisy was off the charts. It's the medieval equivalent of politicians publicly denouncing porn while secretly owning massive VHS collections. Some shunga went way beyond pleasure and into social satire. Artists used erotic scenes to mock the elite, poke fun at the shogunate, or lampoon the hypocrisies of religious figures. Imagine a sex comic doubling as political commentary. It's like Hustler mixed with The Onion, and samurai ate it up. These prints weren't just about lust. They were a coded way of rebelling against authority while also enjoying a guilty pleasure. But the wildest part? Shunga wasn't hidden in bedrooms. It was exchanged as gifts, displayed at drinking parties, even used as conversation starters. Samurai warriors might sit around after battle flipping through erotic prints like they were trading cards. Forget Pokémon, these guys were out here collecting sex scenes. So while the West was still burning books and carving stone statues with missing genitals, Japan was mass-producing porn with the same printing technology they used for literature and religious texts. For the samurai, erotic art wasn't shameful. It was culture, and it was only one part of a much bigger, much darker sexual underworld waiting just beyond the castle walls. Because if shunga was the official porn of Edo Japan, then the real action was happening in the floating world, the hidden brothels and pleasure quarters where samurai left their honor at the door. Picture this: by day, a samurai is a rigid enforcer of Bushidō, the code of honor. But when the sun set and the lanterns of Edo's pleasure quarters lit up, those same warriors were sneaking through narrow backstreets to indulge in a world of sex, sake, and secrets. The most famous of these places? Yoshiwara, an officially sanctioned red light district surrounded by walls and guarded gates. That's right, the shogunate literally built a walled city dedicated entirely to pleasure. Inside, samurai and merchants mingled, drinking, gambling, and paying for the company of courtesans whose reputations were as legendary as any warrior. And these weren't quick encounters in shady alleys. Courtesans in Yoshiwara were celebrities. Some were trained in poetry, dance, and music, capable of dazzling a client with both beauty and brains. But make no mistake, behind the flowing kimonos and coy smiles, this was still a sex industry. Samurai who spent their days preaching discipline and chastity were emptying their purses for nights of debauchery. But here's the twist: samurai were technically banned from openly frequenting these brothels. Bushidō demanded restraint, and the shogunate didn't want warriors wasting their stipends on pleasure. So how did they get in? Disguises. That's right, samurai would swap their crested robes for plain merchant clothes, sneaking into Yoshiwara like teenagers trying to crash an over-18 club. Some even wore fake beards or hats to avoid recognition. Imagine a deadly warrior tiptoeing around like a nervous kid caught shoplifting. That's how badly they wanted in. Inside the quarters, rules flipped upside down. Merchants, normally the lowest class in Japan's rigid hierarchy, suddenly held the upper hand. Why? Because merchants had money and money ruled in Yoshiwara. Samurai with noble titles often found themselves outspent and outshined by wealthy traders. The pleasure district was the one place where the hierarchy crumbled, and honor meant nothing compared to the size of your coin pouch. And let's be clear, this wasn't just straight-laced prostitution. Edo brothels offered everything from same-sex encounters to fetish play to elaborate role-acting sessions. Shunga prints often advertised the menu, so to speak, showing off scenarios that ranged from romantic trysts to scenes that would make even modern viewers blush. If you could imagine it, Yoshiwara had a room for it. Of course, this double life created scandals. Records survive of samurai caught in brothels, exposed to ridicule, or even punished by their lords. But more often than not, everyone turned a blind eye. After all, the same government officials enforcing bans were secretly customers themselves. Hypocrisy wasn't just tolerated, it was institutional. Yoshiwara also became a breeding ground for cultural exchange. Geisha, musicians, and performers turned the pleasure district into a hotbed of creativity, producing art, poetry, and fashion trends that influenced the entire country. Ironically, while the samurai were sneaking in for sex, they ended up shaping Japanese culture as a whole through their indulgence. But there was a darker side. Behind the glamour of lantern-lit streets and perfumed courtesans lay the harsh reality of exploitation. Many women were sold into the quarters as children, bound by contracts they couldn't escape. Some died in poverty, disease, or despair, while wealthy samurai enjoyed fleeting nights of luxury. The pleasure quarters were both a glittering fantasy and a brutal prison. Still, to the samurai who walked those hidden streets, Yoshiwara was irresistible. It was a forbidden world where a warrior could escape the crushing weight of duty, if only for a night. And in doing so, they revealed that even the fiercest swordsmen weren't immune to the oldest temptation in the book. But brothels weren't the only outlet for samurai lust. Beyond Yoshiwara's walls, another tradition flourished, one that blurred art, ritual, and politics into something even stranger. Next up, we're stepping into the ritualized sexuality of the samurai court, where desire wasn't just personal pleasure, it was a tool of power. Samurai weren't just swinging swords, they were also swinging influence. And in feudal Japan, sex wasn't just pleasure. It was a weapon, a ritual, and sometimes the deciding factor in who held power. Let's start with the courts of the daimyo, the powerful lords who controlled entire provinces. Their castles weren't just military centers, they were dens of intrigue where alliances were sealed not only with contracts but also with bedsheets. Concubines, boy lovers, and courtesans weren't mere entertainment. They were political pawns, strategically placed to sway a lord's decisions. If you could seduce a daimyo, you could change the fate of a province. And the samurai knew this. Some warriors deliberately entered relationships with their lords to secure favor, land, or promotions. Remember Bushidō? Those contracts between older warriors and younger boys weren't just about love or sex, they could cement political loyalty. If your general was also your lover, guess who's getting first pick of spoils after the battle? That's not romance, that's career planning. Sex also got ritualized in ways that seem almost surreal today. Certain festivals in Edo Japan included fertility rituals where samurai participated in symbolic acts meant to ensure prosperity for their clan. These rituals often blurred the line between religious devotion and outright orgies. Priests, warriors, and courtesans gathered under the same roof, chanting prayers one moment and stripping robes the next. Imagine mixing Sunday Mass with a frat party, and you're close to the atmosphere. And then there's the shogunate itself, the highest office in the land. Some shoguns were notorious for their personal harems, not just of women but also of beautiful boys. These harems weren't just for indulgence, they were showcases of power. Owning the most desirable lovers meant you had the wealth and influence to keep them. It was status display through sexuality, like driving a Lamborghini, except the Lamborghini was a human being in an embroidered kimono. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about this. Conservative voices in society, especially within certain Buddhist sects, railed against the corruption of samurai lust. But here's the kicker: those same monasteries often had their own traditions of homosexual relationships between monks and novices. In other words, the critics were guilty too. Hypocrisy wasn't just a side effect, it was baked into the system. Samurai also loved mixing eroticism with death. Some Bushidō contracts explicitly stated that if one partner died in battle, the other was honor-bound to follow him into death, either by fighting to the death or committing ritual suicide. That means love and lust were literally tied to the grave. It's the kind of romantic intensity that makes Romeo and Juliet look like high school drama. And let's not forget the coded poetry. Samurai would often exchange love poems with lovers, male or female, that read like delicate works of art on the surface but were filled with sexual innuendo. These weren't just notes slipped under pillows. They were status symbols, proof that you were both cultured and desirable. Imagine political strategy wrapped up in sexy haikus. All of this created a society where sex wasn't just recreation, it was currency. It bought loyalty, cemented alliances, and sometimes toppled rivals. And the samurai played the game ruthlessly. But as wild as court rituals and contracts sound, things get even stranger when you look at the spiritual side. Because samurai weren't only warriors of the flesh, they also believed sex could tap into cosmic power. And that's where the rabbit hole of sexual mysticism opens wide. You might think of samurai as sword-wielding stoics, but behind the steel, many believed in a very different kind of power, the power of the body, energy, and yes, sex. In certain sects of Japanese mysticism, sexual activity wasn't just pleasure, it was a conduit for spiritual strength, longevity, and even martial skill. Some samurai practiced what can only be described as early tantric techniques. They believed that semen contained vital life force called kai, and that controlling its release could enhance vitality, sharpen focus, and even improve swordsmanship. Think of it as the ultimate performance hack. If you saved your energy during sex, you could swing your katana faster, hit harder, and survive longer on the battlefield. Essentially, they turned celibacy into a superpower, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes under strict training regimens. But when abstinence wasn't part of the plan, samurai embraced erotic rituals designed to channel energy instead of waste it. Partners would engage in slow, deliberate encounters where pleasure was carefully timed, breath synchronized, and positions chosen to maximize spiritual transfer. This wasn't foreplay, it was a martial art of the bedroom. Imagine a combat manual where the final chapter is titled, How to Conquer Your Lover and Your Chakra Simultaneously. Then there were sexual talismans and charms. Some samurai carried small amulets inscribed with prayers or symbols to protect against impotence, attract lovers, or ensure victory in battle. Others would place shunga prints under their pillows or wear erotic accessories during meditation to focus sexual energy into spiritual and martial strength. It sounds bizarre, but in Edo Japan, it was as normal as sharpening your sword. And here, where it gets darker. Certain secretive schools taught ritualized same-sex practices where older samurai would initiate younger boys into the mystical arts of pleasure. These rituals were framed as mentorship, blending eroticism with education in loyalty, meditation, and combat skills. Some historians argue these rites weren't just sexual, they were meant to instill discipline, obedience, and mental fortitude in ways nothing else could. Even the most mundane sexual encounters were seen through a lens of spiritual calculation. Timing, location, partner selection, and technique were meticulously planned to align with astrological conditions or religious festivals. Want to conceive a child with heroic qualities? You had to hit the right lunar phase, say the right prayers, and perform the act in a direction favored by the gods. Missing even one detail could allegedly doom your lineage, or at least your spiritual karma. All of this created a strange duality. The samurai could be deadly warriors on the battlefield by day and meticulous, almost obsessive sexual mystics by night. Lust wasn't shameful, it was an extension of honor, strength, and strategy. The body wasn't just flesh, it was a tool for battle, politics, and cosmic alignment. But as intense and disciplined as it all sounds, Edo Japan's sexual landscape wasn't confined to philosophy and ritual. There was also chaotic, unbridled indulgence, the kind of thing that pushed the boundaries of decency, art, and law all at once. That's where the last frontier of forbidden pleasure lies. Samurai in the floating world, literally living out every fantasy their wildest shunga could depict. By now, you're probably thinking, okay, samurai were disciplined, mystical, and a little kinky, but surely there were limits, right? Wrong. Edo Japan was a playground of human desire, and samurai bound by Bushidō by day let loose at night in ways that would make modern audiences gasp. Let's start with the pleasure parties. These weren't your average night outs. Samurai lords and wealthy merchants would host private gatherings called koshokai where the rules of honor were tossed aside. Guests drank sake until they forgot rank, played sexual games involving dice or cards that determined who would pleasure whom, and performed erotic rituals inspired by shunga prints. These parties could last days. Yes, days. Sleep was optional, lust was mandatory. Imagine a bachelor party with the stakes cranked up to 11 and everyone had a sword. Then there were public competitions of erotic skill. Samurai weren't shy about showing off stamina, creativity, or technique. Records survive of contests where men demonstrated their prowess with partners, sometimes for prizes, sometimes simply for bragging rights. The idea, sexual skill was an extension of martial skill. Control, timing, and precision in the bedroom reflected control and precision on the battlefield. Essentially, the samurai were competing in what we'd now call extreme performance art, but with orgasms. And it gets even stranger. Some samurai indulged in extreme fetishes, often inspired by shunga. Tentacles, multiple partners, role-playing scenarios, it was all fair game as long as consent and secrecy were observed. There are accounts of elaborate setups where the samurai would act out scenes from erotic prints, recreating fantasy after fantasy with actors, courtesans, and apprentices. The line between reality and art completely blurred. Let's talk secret societies. Certain samurai circles formed clandestine groups devoted entirely to erotic exploration. Initiates would undergo tests of loyalty, obedience, and skill, sometimes including sexual challenges designed to push limits of endurance and discretion. These societies were elite, hidden, and dangerous because discovery could ruin reputations or careers overnight. Membership wasn't just about pleasure, it was a badge of courage, cunning, and influence. And yes, even death didn't stop indulgence. Some samurai left explicit instructions in their wills, detailing how their estates should support their favorite courtesans, maintain shunga collections, or fund erotic rituals after their passing. In other words, some warriors treated lust as a lifelong investment, planning for pleasure well beyond the grave. But here's the ultimate mind-blower. Despite all the decadence, ritualized mysticism, and open homoerotic relationships, the samurai never lost their grip on society. Edo Japan thrived with this duality, honor and lust coexisting, discipline and indulgence intertwined, sacred duty and forbidden pleasure balanced like a perfectly sharpened katana. So next time someone tells you samurai were all about stoicism, meditation, and empty honor, just remember, behind that steel mask and rigid code was a world of sex, art, manipulation, ritual, and outright debauchery, so insane that modern Tokyo's nightlife seems like a polite tea party in comparison. The forbidden pleasures of the samurai weren't just stories, they were lived, codified, and celebrated. And now, thanks to history, we get to witness the truth. The samurai didn't just fight with swords, they wielded lust like a weapon, a tool, and a way of life.